6 a.m. Israeli fighter jets go wheels up from Hatsarim Air Base. Long-range precision missiles locked under their wings. At that same hour, an Omani mediator reportedly transmits what sources describe as Iran's acceptance of key nuclear terms. Two timelines were running that morning. One pointed toward a deal. One pointed toward a decisive strike. Both were real, but only one side knew about both. 2 hours and 5 minutes later, missiles would hit a compound in Tehran. A supreme leader would be dead, and a diplomatic channel, closer to resolution than anything in a decade, would die with him. Not because it failed, because it was never allowed to. The jets were already in the air. The operation ran like a clock. CIA and Israeli intelligence had confirmed the target, a compound in Tehran where a significant portion of Iran's senior leadership had gathered. Among them, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, supreme leader, the man who had held that title for 36 years. Fighter jets lifted off from southern Israel at 6 a.m. The flight would take 2 hours and 5 minutes. Precision missiles, a flight path threading airspace that had been quietly cleared. At the compound, there was no evacuation, no dispersal. Iran's most powerful figures sat in one place, operating as if the threat level had dropped. The missiles struck. Khamenei was eliminated. Within hours, the news reached every capital on Earth. Condemnations came, celebrations came. The fog of claim and counterclaim rolled in. But underneath that noise, one question kept surfacing. Why now? It's a reasonable question, but it's the wrong one. The better question, the one that would take weeks to surface, is this. Why were so many of Iran's most powerful leaders in one room at the same time? Someone made them feel safe enough to gather. That should bother you. To understand what made that room feel safe, you have to understand what 45 years of failure looks like. Iran and the West have had 5 real chances to end their standoff. Every single one collapsed. The first came after the 1979 revolution. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, America's man in Tehran, was overthrown. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini founded the Islamic Republic. He declared the US and Israel sworn enemies. Whatever diplomatic architecture existed burned to its foundation. The second window opened after the Iran-Iraq War. 8 years, 1 million dead. Iran was exhausted, but the enmity was already structural. The window closed. Third, the Khatami reform era, a moderate president who wanted dialogue, not enough power to deliver it. Fourth, 2002. International inspectors uncovered 2 secret uranium enrichment facilities. Iran claimed civilian energy. Washington and Tel Aviv saw a program for developing warheads. Whatever back channels remained went dark overnight. Then the 5th attempt, the one that actually worked. 2015, the Obama administration and the Iranian regime signed the JCPOA. Iran agreed to limit enrichment. International inspectors got access. Sanctions lifted. For the first time in decades, the fuse was wet. Then the agreement was withdrawn from. Sanctions reimposed. The fuse relit. 5 approaches, 5 collapses. A pattern that looked permanent. But there was a 6th attempt, quieter than all the others, running through a country most people couldn't find on a map. Oman. In the weeks before the strike, something unusual was happening. Israel's tone was softening. Military postures relaxed. Diplomatic language shifted. For the first time in months, the temperature was dropping. If you were watching from inside Iran's leadership, if you were Khamenei or his inner circle, you would have registered this. You would have noted the change. And you might have believed it. There was a reason it felt real. Oman sits in a unique position, friendly with Iran, friendly with the West. For decades, it has served as a quiet broker, the room where adversaries talk without cameras. In the months before the strike, an Omani-mediated channel was active between Iran and Western negotiators. What was reportedly on the table? Nuclear terms, sanctions architecture, verification frameworks, the kind of granular, technical negotiation that only happens when both sides believe a deal is worth pursuing. Sources describe real movement. Iran had reportedly shifted on key enrichment positions. Progress had gone further than anyone outside those rooms publicly acknowledged. So picture it from Tehran. Diplomacy advancing, Israel standing down, two signals pointing the same direction. The logical conclusion: the threat is receding. Iran's senior leaders began consolidating, gathering in fewer locations, relaxing dispersal protocols, meeting in person. Two signals, both looked real. But there's a version of these events where one of them was manufactured to make the other one lethal. If you're watching this and want to support independent analysis of stories that don't fit neatly into any side's narrative, subscribe. It's the single best way to make sure this work continues. After the strike, Israeli defense officials made an extraordinary admission. They described, in their own words, months of strategic deception. The softened rhetoric, the relaxed postures, the de-escalation signals. None of it was real. All of it was engineered, designed from the ground up to produce a specific behavioral response from Iran's leadership. Let that settle. US and Israeli intelligence had spent years building behavioral models of how Iran's regime operates. Under pressure, the leadership disperses, decentralizes, goes paranoid. Communication moves to couriers and cutouts. Targeting becomes nearly impossible. But remove that pressure, even the appearance of it, and the model predicted something different. Leaders would consolidate, gather in fewer locations, lower their guard, resume meeting in person. Present, for the first time in years, a targetable concentration of command authority, which is exactly what happened. The compound where Khamenei died was full of senior officials because they believed the threat was receding. They believed it because every signal told them so. Those signals were an instrument of war. Now, the detail that has been withheld until this moment. The Omani channel wasn't just progressing, it wasn't merely promising. Sources describe it as hours away from a framework. The mediator was in active contact with both sides on the morning of the strike, the same morning the jets took off. Months of manufactured calm, a diplomatic channel approaching resolution, fighter jets airborne before dawn, armed with precision missiles. Two timelines, one was real, one was theater, and the theater worked exactly as designed. But it was one detail, reported weeks later, buried in a single intelligence briefing, that turned war of choice into something no one had a word for yet. The strike timing was adjusted, not because of a threat, not because of an expiring window. The timeline was reportedly moved because the target package had become, in the words of one intelligence source, too perfect. Iran's senior leaders had gathered during the manufactured calm. One place, one time, one compound. The opportunity was too valuable to subordinate to any other consideration, including a diplomatic one. Think about what that means. When you engineer conditions that cause your adversary to lower their guard, when your manufactured signals make them consolidate in targetable locations, and then you strike at the moment of maximum vulnerability, you haven't simply launched a military operation. You've turned the entire environment into a trap. The question this story has been building toward is whether the negotiating table was inside that trap. No one outside a handful of classified briefing rooms can answer that definitively, but the evidentiary chain is visible. Manufactured de-escalation, leadership consolidation matching the behavioral prediction, strike timing adjusted to exploit the result, a diplomatic channel still transmitting when the missiles launched. Now make it personal. This decision was made in secure rooms by a handful of officials. No congressional vote, no public debate, no chance for the people who'd bear the consequences. American, Israeli, Iranian, Emirati, to weigh a deal against a war. The strongest counter-argument is simple. Iran was stalling. Khamenei's regime had decades of duplicity on nuclear commitments. The deal might have been a mirage, but that argument cannot answer one thing. We will never know. The strike didn't just end Iran's leadership, it ended the test. A choice was made, not just for war, but for this war, at this moment, over this specific alternative. What follows is what that choice cost. With Iran's senior leadership eliminated, the structure holding the regime together collapsed. Not the ideology, not the resentment. The structure, the chain of command that determined who could authorize what. What replaced it was not liberation, it was a vacuum. Military units, severed from central command, began freelancing. Militia networks Iran had built across the region, Hezbollah, Iraqi paramilitaries, Houthi cells, were suddenly unsupervised, suddenly desperate, suddenly dangerous in ways they hadn't been when someone held the leash. Dubai burned. Attacks struck Cyprus. operations that served no strategic purpose, no central authority behind them, just the organizational panic of a leaderless network thrashing in the dark. Then came Kuwait, coalition partners, supposedly on the same side, shooting down American jets, allies firing on allies. The fog of a war with no front lines and no one left authorized to sign a ceasefire. This is what leadership removal means when the body keeps moving. And then there was the school, children, a mourning, a building that had nothing to do with any of this, until a freelancing militia's uncoordinated strike turned a classroom into a scene of devastation. That school had no seat in any secure room where anything was decided. Those families were not a variable in anyone's behavioral model. Those children were not a line item in anyone's target package assessment. They are the cost. This is what was chosen, not war in the abstract. This war, these specific lives lost, this specific chaos, chosen over a deal that was reportedly hours away from a framework. If this story changed how you understand the way wars begin, and who gets to decide, share it with one person. That's how these questions stay alive. 2 timestamps, 6 a.m., the same morning. Jets heading east, a mediator transmitting west. You can believe Iran was never going to honor a deal. You might be right. You can believe this strike saved more lives than it cost. You might be right about that too. But here's what you cannot argue. You were never given the chance to find out. No one asked the families in Dubai. No one polled the parents at that school. No one consulted the pilots who'd have to dodge Allied missiles over Kuwait. A war was chosen. A deal was destroyed. Not because it failed, but because it was never allowed to. 2 timelines were running that morning. Someone in a room you'll never see chose which one the rest of us would live in. The jets were already in the air.